Hello there, Alaskans, wherever you are. Welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. This is the place where we talk about, you guessed it, Alaska. Where we keep the mainstream media on their toes and where we are standing up for what's right in a world run by leftists. You can find out more by heading over to mustreadalaska.com and also checking out the Must Read Alaska YouTube channel for some really great content. But first, let's get this party started.
Very good. Well, welcome aboard, everybody, to the Must Read Alaska show, coming to you from somewhere in Alaska. And it's been quite a weekend for us in Anchorage. We had President Donald Trump visiting, and lots and lots of activity around that. We had pro-abortion protests on the Park Strip, and there were a couple of hundred people who went to that. There were really about, I would say, thousands of people who were down at the University of Alaska Airlines Center, where Donald Trump was, and Mike Lindell was, and then just lots and lots of Trump fans. And then out in Palmer, Alaska, at the fairgrounds, there was a Pride Underground. It was kind of a gay underground festival on our fairgrounds, and that was supposed to be a family-friendly event for kids, and lots of drag queen activity out on our fairgrounds. And so it's a great day for me to be able to bring to our program today Chris Elston, who is known as Billboard Chris. Right, Chris?
That's right. I travel around North America, and I have these signs with me that I wear, looking kind of silly in a sandwich board. But I talk about the harm coming to kids thanks to gender ideology. And I got this nickname because I put up a bunch of actual billboards in September of 2020 that simply said, "I love JK Rowling," because she'd spoken out about this. And of course, that got me a ton of hate. And my first billboard in Vancouver, BC was taken down because a city politician said it was hate speech to love the world's greatest children's author. Makes a lot of sense, right?
Right. So we're going to be able to talk about this today, about what you do and what your mission is. And I think that what makes it especially interesting for Alaskans is that you are one person making a huge difference. You stepped out of your comfort zone to do something that you thought was really important for children, and probably one of the most important things that anybody can do, which is to say gender ideology is bad for children, and that children do not have the ability to consent to these puberty blockers. And so I want to talk to you about that. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor of our show, Shoshana Gunderstein, who is a candidate for U.S. Senate. Shoshana Gunderstein is the sponsor of our show this month. We're very, very proud to have her. If any of you did not listen to our program with her last week, I recommend it to you. She is a young, up-and-coming political activist from Juneau. She is a nonpartisan, so she's not Republican, she's not Democrat. She says she leans conservative. And so find out more about Shoshana Gunderstein, and thank you, Shoshana, for sponsoring our show. Now back to our program with Chris Elston. When did you actually first just decide to step out of your comfort zone and start working on this anti-gender ideology program?
Yeah, in July of 2020, I had enough. I'd been researching all this stuff that's going on with kids all year, every night, and going back into 2019. And then in the summer of 2020, there's a woman named Posey Parker in England who put up a sign at the Edinburgh train station that simply said, "I love JK Rowling," because JK has spoken out about these issues with gender ideology, about what's happening to women's rights, and also with what's happening to kids. And, you know, when I first heard the term puberty blockers, I said, what the heck are those? Those don't sound good. And I did my research. Doesn't take very long to understand that they are exactly what they sound like. These are drugs being given to kids that stop their bodies going into puberty. And so for the average person on the street, when they hear about this, they're instantly horrified and disgusted, because we're stopping the physical development of children who have come to believe that they're really a boy trapped in a girl's body or a girl trapped in a boy's body, whatever that means. No one can ever explain how that works, because of course it's total nonsense. But I learned this was happening to kids, and I have two girls. They're 10 and 12 years old now. They were 8 and 10 at the time. And I just didn't like this whole mess that we're in. It's crazy. and we're not allowed to speak about it, because what happened with this sign that got put up that said "I love JK Rowling" was it got taken down the next day as being too hateful.
Was it
because
taken
people
down?
on Twitter complained.
Was it taken down by authorities?
Yeah, it's a government-run train authority that took it down.
Wow.
Just because some people on Twitter complained. And I also happened to be reading Harry Potter at the time with my little 8-year-old. So, JK Rowling was near and dear to us at the time. Of course, she still is, but it's more top of mind when you're reading all these books and everything. So anyway, I just thought, this is ridiculous. We can't even put up a sign that says "I love JK Rowling." So I decided to do something here in Vancouver, BC. And so I put up a huge billboard leading into downtown Vancouver that said the same thing. And it got paint bombed overnight. And then I tweeted out a picture of it on a Friday afternoon, and it went viral. And then a city politician and a bunch of people freaked out, and they said it was hateful. And so they took it down the next day. And so I leveraged that into a campaign to do more all throughout the United States. And then, because there's no way for me to reach people in Canada, I can't even put up a sign to do with anything with this subject. I did what we used to do in the old days. I talk to people.
Okay.
And so I go outside and I go downtown Vancouver where it's busy. I go to events. I started traveling the country, and I have these signs that I wear, because they can take down my sign on a street, but they can't take a sign off my back because it's not actual hate speech, of course. And so people just come up to me and they ask, what are puberty blockers? Because I have this sign usually on my front that says "Children cannot consent to puberty blockers." One on my back, or sometimes my front, now it will say the definition of a dad, which is a human male who protects his kids from gender ideology.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, people like that one. People also hate that one, of course, but it generates a lot of discussion, which is the whole point of what I'm doing. I'm out there to have conversations, and I'm as peaceful as they come. I'm like Gandhi out there. I take tons of abuse. I've been assaulted. I've had my arm broken by Antifa. I've been arrested twice after getting assaulted. It's been a completely crazy ride just for standing out on the street, trying to have conversations with people about actual physical harm coming to children.
What I think is really interesting about this is that this is evidence that one person can take a stand and make a real difference, but not without risk. Because where I became aware of you is that when I became aware that you had been assaulted simply for wearing your sandwich board sign that said "Children cannot consent to puberty blockers." And at this point in our culture, if you can't even say that without, having a physical assault on you, then we are in some real trouble here.
Yeah.
And so so let's talk about these puberty blockers for a minute. And for a lot of kids, when they're growing up, they may want to experiment with different kinds of just behavior. And I know I was not the only tomboy in the world. Lots and lots of girls are tomboys. We're outdoorsy, and when you're a young kid, you just explore the world, and we hunt, we fish, we do all the things in Alaska that we love to do, but that we're still girls. When a lot of these kids are going to public schools and learning that gender is just a social construct, it's not actually a biological thing, it's just whatever you want it to be. And are you finding that kids in public schools in Canada are being exposed to this type of ideology, not just in the US, but also in Canada?
Yeah, Canada's worse than the US, for sure. On almost every metric for this, we're probably the worst in the world. So we've had a bit of a head start. It's been in schools a little longer. Depending on the province you're in, it's also different. It's been worse in British Columbia than the rest of the country, but they're catching up very quickly. And we have laws that are passed that prevent parents from even helping their children feel comfortable with their bodies. It's now considered conversion therapy to help a girl feel comfortable as a girl.
Wow.
It's totally fine to convince her she's a boy. That's okay. But to help her feel comfortable with her sex and not go on these puberty blocking drugs, cross-sex hormones, getting double mastectomies even as children, that's somehow deemed conversion therapy to prevent a child from coming to irreversible damage. But it's fine to convince them that there's something that they're not.
So it's interesting to me because you've got these kids that are starting to get hooked on these drugs at a very young age to do puberty blocking. And how long do they have to stay on these drugs? Is this forever?
So the puberty blocking drugs are designed to stop puberty from happening.
Okay.
So it depends when these kids suddenly identify as trans, because these aren't kids that grew up with what we call gender dysphoria, this feeling of a mismatch between your physical sex and the gender that you think you are. These are primarily girls now hitting adolescence, getting into middle school, where this stuff is all the rage. It's a craze. It's a fad. It's popular. You get rewarded for it because now you're special, because you have some special identity now. Because just to be a cis heteronormative kid is not cool anymore. All these kids are searching for identities, especially the girls. And so it's when they're getting to be 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, a lot of these kids now say that they're trans. But they'll give these puberty blockers to a kid when they're 9 or 10 years old, whenever they first hit puberty. Because the whole objective of these drugs is to stop them from developing to look more like their biological sex, because that would apparently cause distress to the child. This is a lie, of course. And then they give them the opposite sex's hormones. So a kid might go on puberty blockers from 11 to 15. Okay. Could go longer. They're not supposed to go that long because it causes a lot of damage to their bones. Bone demineralization is one of the side effects. A young girl in Sweden, 15 years old, was on them for 3 years, and she suffered spinal fractures and has early stage osteoporosis, and she's in chronic pain. Another mom I just talked to in California a few months ago, her daughter was on these for 2 or 3 years, and she lost 11% of her bone density at a time when her bones should be getting way stronger, because our bones are a lot softer as kids. They get a lot harder during puberty. But that's one of the side effects of this puberty blocking drug. And then they give them the opposite sex's hormones. So it's girls taking testosterone. They'll do this at 13 years of age. The World Professional Association for Transgender Health had recommended 60 years of age, but all these gender clinics just kind of do whatever they want because none of this is regulated. And it's just the wild west of so-called gender medicine. They call this gender affirming care to give it a nice little euphemistic term. But what this is stopping the physical development of a child and then putting copious amounts of opposite sex hormones into their body that don't belong there. They're at greater chance of cancer. A lot of these girls, they have to get hysterectomies after 4 or 5 years because it causes vaginal and uterine atrophy when you're taking testosterone. Of course, they're going to get a deep voice. They're going to grow hair everywhere. It causes other effects I don't even want to get into on the air, but people can Google this. There's tons of negative side effects. It's like a form of female genital mutilation as well. But anyway, yeah, it's totally nuts. These kids are being led to believe that just because they don't match the stereotypes associated with their sex, that must mean that they're the opposite sex and that they're only going to find true happiness by transition.
There has to be some sort of financial benefit to somebody in all of this. And I'm guessing that the pharmaceutical companies are absolutely thrilled to get people hooked on medicines for life. I mean, I come from kind of a natural medicine and a natural lifestyle background. I'm people who know me know that I was, owned a natural food store, and I've always been organic and I'm kind of like a hippie in that way. I'm probably the most conservative hippie everybody knows, but this sounds like big pharma to me. This sounds really, really sinister.
Yeah, they, of course, are profiting from this. These kids are becoming lifelong medical patients. So they go on the puberty blockers to stop puberty. And then when they're 16 or 17 years of age, when a girl's done puberty, they're not going to need these drugs anymore because they're not going to be able to go through puberty again when in their 20s. But the testosterone, they have to stay on for life.
So for you are now kind of doing this partly full time. Are you full time with this now?
I'm pretty much full time.
Full time with this, and you're going around the country talking to people. I've watched you've got a great website. We're going to point people to that in a little bit to learn more, because I think what you're doing is super important work, by the way, Chris. And so what are some of the stories you're hearing from people, like parents or people who have had this done and now realize that they've been completely used?
So yeah, I tweet out the stories all the time, and people can find me on Twitter at Billboard Chris.
Billboard Chris.
There's a search ban on me, so you have to enter the whole name and then click on it, because I won't show up in the search bar because Twitter's censoring me. But
sure,
it's Billboard Chris, and I tweet out stories all the time of detransitioners. So these are young people who now have deep regrets about what they did in their teens, usually, and they're saying, "What the heck did you do to me? I was a child. I was struggling." Mm-hmm. I had other comorbidities going on. I was depressed and anxious and had an eating disorder. I was cutting. and I needed mental health help. And I was just pushed onto this gender treadmill instantly of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and double mastectomies as children. And it is primarily girls these days that this is affecting. And you get schools where 1 out of 10 kids say they're transgender or non-binary. This used to affect 1 out of 10,000.
Mm-hmm.
Now you get 1 out of 10, and you get entire peer groups of girls who say they're trans.
And it's almost
Obviously,
like it's
this is
a fad.
contagion.
It's like a social contagion. That's a good way of putting it. It's a social contagion.
100%, it's a social contagion. A mom, I tweeted this story the other day. Someone else wrote this story, but it was a mom in a Facebook group for transgender allies. She decided to read her daughter, who's 10 years old, some of these books about being transgender. Well, guess what? 1 month later, this girl decided she was trans. Her mom read her the books. Don't be surprised when you introduce your child to a cult when they end up joining the cult.
Right.
And a month later, this girl decided she was trans. And now mom is saying, I know she's not really trans because, of course, parents know their daughters and their sons. But this kid's been indoctrinated. And now all of a sudden, these people that she was just the allies of and the friends with are telling her that she's now a transphobe because she's not listening to her son, which they call this girl. It's just instant. As soon as a kid says they're trans, we are just supposed to believe this 100% and medicate them. Mm-hmm. Now, if we go back in time and we look at historical gender dysphoria, real gender dysphoria, not this craze, but where kids, mostly boys, historically, this affected from a very young age, these boys were much more feminine. They wanted to be girls, whatever. 80 to 90% of those kids, when they grew up and went through puberty, this dysphoria just went away on its own. Mm-hmm. And this was a tiny number of them. And they just grew out of it because the cure for gender dysphoria is their own hormones that come with puberty. It's testosterone for boys, it's estrogen for girls. We block that now. So we're blocking the cure, which would make them feel more comfortable, plus just age and brain development and maturation. We don't even know what these drugs and hormones are doing to brain development, by the way. This whole thing is an experiment. These drugs have never been approved by the FDA for this purpose. This drug was approved to treat prostate cancer in men, endometriosis in women, and it's the same exact drug that we've given to pedophiles to chemically castrate them. But we don't do that anymore because it's deemed too inhumane. But we're going to give this to a 10-year-old child.
Okay.
Who still believes the Easter Bunny comes in and leaves chocolate eggs around their house every year.
Right.
Because they've suddenly decided that they want to be the other sex. Because guess what? Growing up is hard. Puberty's hard. Tends to be more hard for girls, I think. Their bodies are changing more. They're getting sexualized by men, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, we're just going to medicate these kids with no clinical trials ever been having done into this. For the first time in human history, in 300,000 years that we've been on this planet, we're going to start playing with children's biology because AbbVie Pharmaceuticals has a drug which can stop their puberty.
Right.
And we're just all going to go along with this and call this loving and kind when we're sterilizing children, because that's also happening to these kids.
Yes.
So yeah, it's all totally nuts. It's child abuse. The left just lie like a rug. Mm-hmm. Every time they talk about this issue. They say these puberty blockers are just a pause button and they're fully reversible. No, but there's no time machine that takes you back in age from 17 to 11 years of age where you should be going through puberty. These boys that grow up on these drugs, they end up with a micropenis for life. The president of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, Marcy Bowers, who is himself a trans woman, so biological male, but this is the person running the body that writes the standards of care. Marcy Bowers just admitted 2 months ago that literally 0 of these boys, none of them, when they've grown up, have ever been able to have any sexual function. They can't have an orgasm.
No.
Things just don't work down there. So they can't have intimate relationships. We're taking that away from these children. We have over 42,000 girls and young women right now on GoFundMe trying to raise money to cut their breasts off for gender purposes.
Say that again. Say that again. What's
there
that?
There are over 42,000 girls and young women on GoFundMe right now trying to raise money for a double mastectomy.
GoFundMe allows that, huh?
They promote it. They have a page just for it. It's gender affirming care. They think they're saving lives.
It's just stunning. What you're telling me is just stunning. And it's so important that Alaskans hear it, because we're getting more and more of that up here in Alaska. We have our school districts are now erasing the gender norms for restrooms, of course. And also some of the schools are allowing boys to play on girls' teams if they decide that they want to identify as a girl, which is kind of another side angle. It's a little bit different. These may or may not be going through transition, but if they identify as a girl, they can still compete on a girls' team. What are the kinds of pushback you're getting, other than you've had some personal violence against you? I presume you don't go to Portland.
I went there once. I was on my way through and I thought, well, let's stop in Portland. And I went into the downtown area. This was back in the late fall, I think, or December. And it was dead. It was like a ghost town in there, in the downtown area. And I'd been there about 10 years ago and it was thriving and busy. Yeah. And it's totally dead now. So I hung out for about an hour and nothing was really happening. And I left. But yeah, that's one city I'm kind of wary of, for sure.
Yeah, you could get hurt there. But I understand that you're on your way to Florida. You're going down to Tampa to speak with parents, and you've got some events going there. And also, what is next on your journey, do you see?
Yeah, I'm heading to Florida. I'm going to be speaking at a conference. There's a group called Moms for Liberty.
Oh, I've heard of them.
They're phenomenal. So I know one of the co-founders pretty well, Tiffany Justice. And they are amazing. These two women were both school board members whose terms ended in 2020. And in January of 2021, they started up this group. Right. And they have 100,000 members now all across the country.
I think there's some members. Yeah, I think there may be a chapter even in Alaska somewhere. I'll look into that.
Probably. But yeah, they're phenomenal. And they are taking this like we need to, right to the school boards. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually going to have about 3 2-minute speeches prepared this week that I'll post on Twitter and on my website that people can use to go to their school board, and they'll have this 2-minute speech they can make their own a little bit and just blast these school board officials, because they have no idea what the heck they're doing to our kids. The unions are pushing this. They think they're being loving and kind, but what they are teaching to these children is exactly this. And I'm going to reference the most popular resource used in schools. It's called the genderbread person. It's a little gingerbread man, but of course they call it the genderbread person because they don't want to give it a gendered name.
Right. Okay.
But it defines your gender identity right on there as being based on your personality, your jobs and hobbies, your likes and dislikes, your roles in society, and your expectations.
Wow, they use that to define gender?
Gender identity, personality, likes, dislikes, jobs, roles, hobbies, expectations.
You know, I hate to say it, but that sounds really sexist to me.
Thank you. It's 100% regressive, sexist, ridiculous nonsense. Like, are we back in the 1950s now?
Yeah.
Where the toys that you play with are only for one sex?
Yeah, I like to cook, therefore I must be a girl.
Exactly. There's an expression. Sexism is saying that women should do the dishes. Equality is, men or women can do the dishes. Gender ideology teaches that whoever's doing the dishes is a woman.
Okay, got it. You are amazing, Chris Elson. I am very, very thrilled to have you on our show. I want to give our listeners a chance to know where to reach you. And so you're on Twitter, and that's where I found you. But a lot of our people in Alaska are not on Twitter. It's a very hostile place for Alaska conservatives, so they tend to stay away from that. But where else can they reach you? Let's give them your website,
sure.
And let's give them your, like, if you have a Facebook page or anything else.
I'm not doing Facebook. I like Twitter because you can reach millions if a tweet goes big or whatever.
Yeah.
But I have my website, so it's billboardchris.com. My Twitter feed is on there. If people aren't on Twitter, they can still see my latest feed and whatever I'm tweeting about, because that's really where I do most of my campaigning. I'm also on Instagram, but I need to get it going more. But it's also the same handle, Billboard Chris.
Billboard Chris.
So yeah, billboardchris.com, and on Twitter and Instagram at Billboard Chris.
And it's at your site there, I noticed that there's a donate button. And I want to encourage everybody who's listening today or watching on Facebook to go to billboardchris.com and to just, throw some help his way. He's going to Tampa, Florida to talk to moms down there and help them activate and learn how to speak to school boards And Chris is going all over the country, and that comes at great cost. And I think this is a cause worth supporting. It's not about hate. This is all about love. This is about love and about using our rational, science-based approach to what gender is. It's all about chromosomes, people. If you've got X chromosomes or Y chromosomes, it's not about whether or not you prefer to play with dolls. We don't want to see them redefining gender. We want to see gender as it actually is, science-based. And so, Chris, we appreciate you so much coming on our show. I know you've got to go and catch a plane from British Columbia. You're going to go to Toronto, you said, and then head down to Tampa, Florida. We'd like to have you back on our show in a few months and just recap where you've been and how this journey is taking you.
I'd love to. I'm very honored you had me on. Thank you so much.
Very good. And for everybody who's still with us today, please go click on Shoshana Gungerstein for Senate and check her out. She's the sponsor of our podcast this month. And we're very, very much appreciative of that. It costs a lot of money to keep this operation going here at Must Read Alaska. We've got the podcast, of course, as you know. We've got the website. We have an amazing social media account. We've got a newsletter. And we appreciate all of you who join us here on the podcast. And I believe we'll have one tomorrow. We may have an important guest on tomorrow. I'm hoping that we're going to see Kelly Chewbacca for Senate as our guest. So until then, we're going to leave you now from somewhere in Alaska. Safe journeys, Chris. You take care.
Thank you so much. Take care.